Today, I'm going to tell you a story so raw and unflinching it still burns in the back of my throat. A story of a woman who chose death over chains, running straight into the red heart of Apacheria, where the desert doesn't forgive, and the land remembers every trespass. It begins with one small, terrible sound, the creak of a loose floorboard hiding a brother's old revolver. One decision. One step across sacred ground, and everything that followed could never be undone. Before we ride into this unforgiving land, hit that like button and drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from right now. The morning light came hard and flat across the Elias Whitmore place, bleaching the boards gray and turning the dust to powder underfoot. Clara Ara stood at the single window arms, folded tight against her ribs, staring at the wedding dress hung on the wall like a shroud left out to dry. Ivory silk caught the sun in a way that made it look sick, almost luminous with wrongness. She had not touched it since Elias brought it home 2 days ago. Outside, her father worked the makeshift altar-old fence posts lashed together with rawhide, a plank balanced across for the preacher who would never come if she had her way. Elias moved slow, deliberate the way a man does when every nail he drives costs him something he cannot name. Nora knelt nearby, spreading a thin blanket over the bench seats, her hands steady but her shoulders rounded as though bearing an invisible yoke. Neither spoke. The wind had died completely. No bird called. Even the distant creak of the windmill had stopped. Clara Ara felt the silence settle into her bones like cold iron. She knew the signs from the old hands, who drifted through the territory when the desert held its breath. Something had already been broken. Last night, she had seen the tracks herself. Heavy boots shod horses cutting close to the dry wash behind the barn. Harlan's men. They had not come for her yet, but they had walked where no white man should, brushing against ground that belonged to older laws. Her father straightened, wiped sweat from his brow, with a sleeve already stiff with dust. He glanced toward the house, eyes meeting hers for half a heartbeat before sliding away. Shame lived there, plain as the scar on his left cheek from a long-ago bar fight. Nora rose, smoothed the blanket once more, then turned her back and walked toward the lean-to kitchen without a word. Clara Ara exhaled slow and controlled. The air tasted of dry mesquite and gun oil. Beneath the loose floorboard by her cot lay Cole's old Navy Colt, 6 loads still in the cylinder, the way he had left it before the fever took him. She had checked it last night, thumb brushing the worn ivory grips, feeling the faint warmth of metal that had once belonged to her brother. She could pretend. Step outside helped Nora with a coffee smile, thin and obedient, while the sun climbed and the day marched toward dusk and the preacher and the vows she would choke on. Or she could admit what the silence already knew, the debt Elias owed had not stayed on paper. It had walked across sacred ground, stirred things that should have slept, and now the desert remembered. Her fingers found the loose board. She lifted it just enough to see the glint of blued steel. The wood creaked, once soft as a sigh. Outside, Elias drove another nail. The sound rang flat and final against the stillness. Clara Ara let the board fall back into place. Not yet, but the choice had already begun to harden inside her like cooling lead. The land was listening, and it did not forgive easily. The first light bled thin and pale over the rim rock, turning the sagebrush to ghost shapes. Clara Ara moved quick but quiet through the barn, the borrowed clothes of her brother hanging loose on her frame. Cole's wool pants cinched tight with twine, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, boots too big, but better than skirts for riding hard. She saddled Ginger in the half-dark, fingers numb on the cinch, the mare's breath warm against her wrist, like the only living thing left that remembered kindness. She led the horse out the back away from the house where Elias still slept, the sleep of a man who had sold his daughter for a clear ledger. No lantern, no goodbye. Only the soft clink of bit and bridle, the creak of leather, the faint metallic tang of fear sweat on her own skin. At the edge of the yard she paused, hand on the locket at her throat, the silver oval with the tintype of her family from better days. She slipped it open, one's thumb brushing the faded faces, then closed it and tucked the chain beneath the shirt collar. The photograph she left behind on the cot face down like a secret buried. She swung up, knees gripping Ginger's sides, and nudged the mare into a walk. The prairie dropped away behind her flat, and indifferent the ranch, shrinking to a smudge against the dawn. No one called after her. No dog barked. The silence pressed in, thick as dust in the throat. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, the rhythm of hooves had steadied her breathing. She kept to the low washes, avoiding the skyline, letting Ginger pick her footing over loose shale. The air tasted dry of alkali and sun-baked stone. Every mile felt borrowed. She told herself this was freedom running toward nothing known, but the knot in her chest said otherwise. Then she heard it, distant thunder that was not thunder. Hooves, multiple. Coming from the south, steady, unhurried. Harlan had found the empty room, the missing horse, the tracks she could not hide. Rafe Scar Boone would be riding point eyes sharp for broken twigs. Buck Big Jim Slade would be cursing the early start. Diego Snake Reyes would be smiling that thin, patient smile. Clara Ara urged Ginger into a lope, the mare's flanks heaving under her. She did not look back. Looking back would make it real. Ahead, the land broke into deeper canyons, red rock walls rising like silent judges. She guided the horse into the first narrow slot, and the shade sudden and cold against her neck. The walls closed in muffling sound, trapping her own breathing loud in her ears. She dismounted to lead Ginger through a choke point, boots scraping stone. There, on a flat boulder, half buried in the wash, she saw an old mark, faint spirals, and lines pecked into the rock by hands long gone. Apache. Sacred. A place where no outsider should step. She froze, pulse loud in her temples. The mark was not a warning sign. It was a boundary. Crossing it meant something shifted, something the desert kept account of. Behind her, the hoofbeats grew clearer, echoing off the canyon walls like stones dropped into a well. Harlan's voice, carried once faint but unmistakable, spread out. She can't be far. Clara Ara stared at the petroglyph. Her hand tightened on the reins. Turn back now, ride straight into Harlan's arms, beg mercy from a man who had none, or keep going deeper into ground that did not belong to her ground, that might remember her trespass longer than Harlan remembered his debt. She took one step forward, then another. The rock passed beneath her boot without sound. Ginger hesitated, ears flicking, then followed. The hoofbeats swelled closer. The canyon narrowed, and somewhere ahead in the deepening shadow, the land waited, patient, unblinking, already counting the cost. The canyon walls closed like a fist-red rock swallowing the last of the daylight. Clara Ara backed against the boulder boots, scraping loose gravel, the Navy Colt steady in both hands now. Her breath came shallow, tasting of dust and copper. Ginger stood a few yards off ears-pinned flanks, heaving from the hard run that had ended here in a box with no way out. Harlan stepped into the open first, black duster, hanging heavy with trail dirt, the ivory grips of his Colts catching the dying light. Behind him, the others fanned out, Rafe Scar Boone with his knife already drawn. Buck Big Jim Slade blocking the narrow mouth like a fallen boulder, Diego Snake Reyes leaning easy against the wall, thumbs hooked in his belt. They did not rush. They knew she had nowhere left. Harlan's scarred mouth twisted. "You run, good girl?" Almost made me proud. He spat tobacco juice onto the stone. But pride don't pay debts. Clara Ara's finger rested light on the trigger. She felt the old iron warm against her palms and the faint vibration of her own pulse traveling up the barrel. She did not answer. Words would only give him more to chew on. He took another step. Had a little talk with Pete Kowski up near the trading post. Old Pete knows these canyons better than most. Said a white girl riding alone leaves tracks even a blind man could follow. Said there's Apache sign mixed in now, old arrows, old marks. You've been keeping company. The words landed like stones in still water. Clara Ara's eyes flicked to the ground near her feet. One of the arrows that had saved her earlier, half buried in the dirt, fletched with eagle quills. Taza's. Harlan bent, picked it up slow, turning it in his fingers like he was inspecting a coin. "Pretty work," he said. "Reckon whoever shot this'll come looking for it." And when he does, Clara Ara fired. The report cracked sharp against the walls, smoke blooming bitter in the still air. The bullet took Harlan high in the left shoulder, spinning him half around. He grunted once low, and ugly blood, already darkening the black wool. His good hand went to the wound fingers coming away wet. For a heartbeat, everything hung, suspended the smell of black powder, the metallic ring in her ears, the way Harlan's eyes widened, not in pain, but in surprise that she had actually done it. Then the others moved. Rafe lunged. Clara Ara tried to pivot, but the boulder at her back left no room. She lost her footing on loose shale, the Colt slipping from sweat-slick fingers. It clattered across rock. Buck's meaty hand clamped her wrist, twisting hard enough to make bone grind. She bit down on a cry. Diego stayed back, watching that thin smile still in place. Harlan straightened, blood dripping steady onto the stone. "You just made this personal, sugar." Clara Ara's eyes found the arrow again, still in Harlan's grip. He raised its slow point toward her throat. The canyon held its breath. Then from high above came the sound, short, rising raw. A war cry that cut the air like a blade. An arrow hissed down, struck Harlan's forearm. The shaft quivered. He dropped the first arrow with a curse. Another shaft took Buck in the thick of the thigh. The big man roared and staggered, releasing Clara Ara. She dropped to one knee hand, scrabbling for the Colt. From the rim, a silhouette, tall braided hair whipping in the sudden wind, Taza. Boo, already knocked again. Harlan clutched his arm, blood running between fingers. "Apache," he snarled. Fall back now." The men scrambled toward the mouth of the canyon, dragging Buck between them. Clara Ara stayed low. Colt retrieved barrel trained on the retreating shapes until they vanished around the bend. Silence returned heavier than before. She looked up. Taza was gone from the rim, but near her feet the second arrow had struck stone beside the old petroglyph, the sacred spirals now cracked where the iron point had bitten deep. A faint tremor ran through the ground, brief as a heartbeat, then gone. Clara Ara stared at the fractured mark. The desert felt different now, colder, watching closer. Something had shifted that could not be put back. She rose slowly, legs unsteady, and listened to the fading hoofbeats. The canyon held its new silence, like a secret it would keep forever. The canyon opened, sudden and narrow walls rising sheer to a thin strip of sky the color of old iron. Taza rode ahead on his paint stallion, guiding without hurry, the horse's hooves soft on sand. Clara Ara sat behind him, arms loose around his waist, only when the trail steepened her body stiff against the warmth of his back. She had not spoken since the rim. Neither had he. They descended into a hidden valley where the air smelled of pinon smoke and wet earth. Wiki-Up's low domes of brush and pole, lashed with yucca fiber, stood in a loose circle around a small fire pit. Horses grazed on sparse grass near a seep of water. No one moved to greet them at first. Eyes watched from doorways from the shade of overhangs. A boy Tarak, no more than 8, stood at the edge of the largest Wiki-Up, small hands clenched at his sides, staring without blinking. Taza dismounted first, then offered a hand. Clara Ara took at her palm, rough from rains, and stepped down. The ground felt different here, firmer, older. She kept her eyes low on the dust between her boots. Mangas emerged from the central Wiki-Up. Tall, iron-gray hair braided with strips of leather face, lined deep as dry wash. He carried no weapon visible, but the way he stood said none was needed. Lozen followed a step behind strong-shouldered woman hair, tied back with red cloth eyes, sharp as flint. Mangas looked at Clara Ara a long time. No anger, no welcome, just measuring. He spoke low in Apache to Taza. The warrior answered once short. Then Mangas turned to her. "You brought the black-hearted one's shadow," he said in careful English. The words landed flat without heat. Clara Ara swallowed dust. "I didn't mean to." He reached into a pouch at his belt and drew out a scrap of black wool torn from Harlan's duster, still stiff with dried blood. "This was found near the spring, 2 days ago, before you came." He let it fall to the ground between them. The cloth lay there like an accusation no one needed to voice. Lozen stepped forward. She studied Clara Ara's face, then her hands, soft still in places, blistered in others. Without a word, she turned and walked back into the Wiki-Up. A moment later, she returned with a clay bowl of mescal pulp and roasted agave. She set it on a flat stone near the fire, but did not offer it. Instead, she pointed to a spot apart from the circle, a bare patch of earth under an overhang. "Sit there," Lozen said. Her voice carried no kindness, no cruelty, only necessity. Clara Ara obeyed. The ground was cold through Cole's pants. She sat cross-legged, hands in lap, feeling every eye in the camp settle on her like weight. Tarak stayed at the doorway, watching. He did not come closer. Mangas crouched near the fire. The flames popped once, sending a spark into the dusk. "My daughter Nasha went for her plants near the White Road. Harlan kept her 3 days. Then his men finished what he started." He paused, staring into the coals. "We found what was left. Enough to bury." The silence stretched. Clara Ara felt it press against her ribs. She wanted to speak of the necklace of bones Harlan had forced on her, of the debt that was not hers, but the words stayed locked behind her teeth. Speaking now would sound like excuse, and excuses had no place here. Mangas rose. "You live because Taza brought you, but the land knows a debt unpaid. You carry its mark now." He looked at Lozen. She nodded once. 7 days, Mangas said. "Lozen teaches you our ways. How to build shelter, find water, prepare food that does not shame the earth. If you learn, you may stay. If you fail." He let the sentence die. The fire snapped again. "You become the one who brings imbalance, and the land will not carry you." Clara Ara met his eyes for the first time. No plea in hers. Only the quiet understanding that she had crossed a line no words could uncross. Mangas turned away. Lozen gestured for Clara Ara to follow her to the separate spot. As Clara Ara rose, the ground beneath her feet trembled just once, faint as a distant horse walking far off. The others felt it too. Heads, lifted eyes went to the canyon walls. No one spoke of it. Clara Ara walked to the overhang and sat again. The bowl of mescal remained untouched on the stone between the circle and her place apart. Lozin returned to the fire without another glance. The night settled cold and complete. Somewhere in the dark, Tarek still watched small shadow against the wicky-up wall eyes fixed on the white woman who had come with blood on her trail. The earth had noticed, and it was already keeping score. The days in the hidden valley blurred into one long ache. Sun rose hot and merciless, baking the red earth until it cracked like old leather. Clara Ara woke each morning on the bare spot under the overhang blanket, thin as memory, the smell of pinon smoke drifting from the main fire like something she was allowed to smell but not share. Lozin came at first light, wordless, carrying a bundle of yucca fiber and a digging stick. She showed Clara Ara how to strip the leaves, twist them into cordage strong enough to lash poles for a wicky-up frame. Clara Ara's hands, once soft from ranch house chores, blistered quick. The first day the cord snapped twice under her pull. Lozin said nothing, only handed her more fiber. Clara Ara nodded again, jaw-tight, sweat stinging the raw skin. By the third morning, she helped build a small shelter of her own poles-bent brush, woven tight dirt packed at the base. It stood crooked, but held. Lozin inspected it without comment, then led her to the seep where water trickled slow over mossy rock. There she taught the slow work of roasting agave hearts in a pit lined with hot stones. Clara Ara built the fire too high, the hearts charred black smoke acrid and thick. Lozin scraped the mess away, reset the stones, started again. No rebuke, only the quiet insistence that the earth did not forgive haste. Clara Ara watched the camp while she worked. Women moved in steady rhythm, grinding mescal tanning hides stretched on frames, children running barefoot between wicky-ups. Tarek followed at a distant small shadow among rock's eyes always on her. He never came close enough to speak. When she looked his way, he turned aside, pretending interest in a lizard or a stone. The water changed first. One afternoon, the seep ran muddy, then thin. Dead minnows floated belly up in the shallow scales, dull. Lozin knelt, cupped a handful, let it drain through her fingers. She said nothing, but her shoulders set harder. That evening, Chato returned from scout, face dark. He spoke low to Mangas by the fire. Clara Ara caught only fragments, tracks shod horses close. Harlan's men had crossed the ridge, their boots churning the spring higher up. The imbalance spread quiet, but sure grass yellowed overnight near the waterbirds left the cottonwoods. Chato's voice carried once sharp enough to reach her overhang. She brings death. White shadow on the land. Heads turned. A woman pulled her child away when Clara Ara passed to fetch more wood. The boy hesitated, then ran after his mother without looking back. Clara Ara kept working. She scraped hides until her arms trembled, gathered prickly pear with bleeding fingers, learned to start fire with bow drill, until sparks caught on the third try. Each failure burned deeper than the blister's hands, shaking breath short. But she swallowed the shame, kept her eyes on the task. To stop would prove Chato right. On the 6th evening, Lozin came to her shelter. The woman carried a small pouch of dried meat and a gourd of water. She set them on the ground between them. "You have learned enough to live one more day," Lozin said. "But the land must judge the rest." Clara Ara looked up. Lozin's face showed nothing, no pity, no anger. Only the weight of what came next. "Tomorrow you go alone. 3 days, 3 nights. No blanket, no knife. No fire unless you make it. Find water, find food. If the earth forgives what you carry, you return. If not." Lozin let the words hang. "You die here." Clara Ara felt the words settle cold in her chest. She could refuse slip away tonight, ride back into the open where Harlan waited, spare the camp further harm. Or she could step into the desert with nothing risk, everything on ground that already remembered her trespass. Lozin waited. The firelight flickered across her face. Clara Ara nodded once. Lozin rose without another word and walked back to the circle. Clara Ara sat alone staring at the gourd and the meat she had not yet touched. Across the valley, Tarak stood at the edge of the firelight, small figure motionless, watching her as the stars came out one by one. The seep trickled weaker now. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote yipped once short and lonely. The land waited patient, unhurried, already deciding. The third dawn came gray and thin light, filtering down canyon walls like water through cracked stone. Clara Ara crouched beside the shallow scrape she had dug with her hands, and a flat shard of rock 3 handspans deep, the seep slow but steady. She had learned to watch the color of the earth. Darker sand meant moisture, white meant death. The water tasted of alkali and grit, but it kept her alive. She sipped once, twice, then pressed her palm to the ground to steady herself. Her lips were cracked, tongue thick. The nights had been cold enough to make her bones ache. She had curled tight against the rock face arms, wrapped around her knees, breathing slow to keep the heat in her chest. She had eaten what the land gave prickly pear pads, singed over sparks she coaxed from bow drill, until her palms bled fresh mescal root, pounded soft and bitter on a flat stone. Each bite reminded her she was still here, still breathing, still trespassing. By mid-morning, the canyon felt smaller. Shadows shortened. Then she herded hooves on stone, deliberate closing from the south. Not one horse. Many. Harlan had found her trail Pete Kowski's word, or the broken arrow she had left behind, or simply the stubborn luck of a man who never let debt walk free. She pressed flat against the rock heart, loud in her ears. They came into view at the mouth of the narrow slot, Harlan first shoulder bandaged, rough, black duster torn. Rafe Boone beside him, knife out. Buck Slade limping, heavy thigh wrapped in dirty cloth. Diego Reyes, trailing eyes scanning the rims. They dismounted, slow boots, grinding dust. Harlan pointed to the petroglyph, the old spirals carved deep into the boulder symbol of Usin, the creator. One of his men, Rafe, drove a boot heel against the base, testing. Another began to dig with a knife point, prying at the loose earth around the stone as if it hid something worth taking. The ground answered. A low tremor rolled through the rock, faint at first, then sharper. Dust sifted from the walls. The men froze. Harlan looked up, scarred face tightening. Keep digging. Whatever's here, it's worth something. Clara Ara watched from her hiding place. Her water basin carefully scraped, patiently filled lay, exposed now. One of the horses stamped near it. Muddy hoofs splashed in, stirring the last clear drops to brown sludge. She felt the thirst rise again, immediate and brutal. Her body weakened, knees, soft vision narrowing, but something harder settled in her spine. Running had brought her here. Hiding would only delay what the land already knew. She could stay low, wait for Taza's arrow from the rim, pray it came before Harlan's men found her. But if they kept digging, if they broke the stone further, the imbalance would spread back to the valley, to the seep, to the wiki-ups, to people who had given her shelter she had not earned. Or she could step out, face it, end it. Her hand closed around the flat shard she had used for digging, sharp enough to cut if needed. She rose, slow legs, trembling but steadying. The men turned at the sound of her boots on gravel. Harlan's mouth curved. There you are, sugar. Clara Ara walked straight to the petroglyph boulder. Without pause, she knelt, fingers wrapping around the carved stone. The rock felt warm, alive, humming under her palm like a heartbeat, not her own. She lifted it small enough to hold one-handed, heavy with age and meaning. A person outside should never touch it. She knew that now, felt it in the sudden tightness of her chest, the way the air thickened. The ground shook harder, once violent dust rising in a thin veil. Harlan's men staggered. Rafe dropped his knife. Harlan stared, eyes narrowing. Clara Ara lifted her voice, raw but clear. "Harlan." He stepped forward, hand on his Colt. "You got no play left, girl." She held the stone higher, knuckles white. "This ends here." From the far rim, a small figure watched Tarek, hidden among boulders, eyes wide and unblinking. He saw her lift the sacred thing, saw the earth answer, saw the line cross that no song, no offering, no time could uncross. The canyon held its breath. The imbalance widened, silent and sure. And Clara Ara stood in the open stone, in hand no longer hiding. The ledge was narrow, barely wider than two boots placed side by side, red rock, dropping sheer to the canyon floor 20 feet below. Clara Ara stood with her back to the wall, the sacred stone heavy in her right hand, warm, still humming faintly against her palm, like something alive and angry. Her left hand gripped the edge of rock for balance. Sweat stung the cuts on her fingers. The sun stood high, baking the stone, until it felt like iron underfoot. Harlan faced her 10 paces away, blood dark on his shoulder bandage, the other arm hanging useless from the arrow still lodged in his forearm. His good hand rested on the butt of one Colt. He breathed through his mouth teeth, showing in a grimace that might have been pain or grin. "You got guts, girl," he said. "But guts don't change facts. I know where that little camp is. Wiki-ups, horses, women, kids. One word from me, and my boys burn it clean. Take what's left, arrows, beads, whatever they call holy. Sell it for whiskey and powder." Clara Ara's gaze never left his face. She felt the stone's weight settle deeper, as though it knew what words were coming next. The ground beneath them trembled again, short, sharp, like a warning breath held too long. Dust sifted from the rim above red as dried blood on the wind. She remembered the locket at her throat, and the last piece of the old life silver warm from her skin, the tintype inside showing Elias and Nora and Cole before the fever, before the debts, before everything turned to ash. Her fingers brushed it once, almost without thought. Then the chain caught on the rough edge of the stone she held. It snapped. The locket fell turning once in the air, striking rock with a small, final clink. It bounced, opened the tintype, skittering across the ledge and over the edge, into nothing. Gone. She did not look down, did not reach. The wind took the sound away. Harlan laughed, once low and rough. "No more mama's keepsake, just you and me now." Clara Ara stepped forward one deliberate pace. The ledge crumbled a fraction under her boot. Pebbles rattled down the face. She lifted the sacred stone, higher, knuckles white. "You won't touch them," she said. The words came quiet, steady, without plea. Harlan drew his Colt's slow thumb, cocking the hammer. The metallic click echoed off the walls. "Then come get me." From the opposite rim, an arrow hissed clean straight, taking Harlan in the meat of his good thigh. He staggered, leg buckling. Taza's second shaft followed, grazing his ribs. Harlan roared, swung the pistol toward the sound, but Clara Ara was already moving. She closed the distance in 3 strides, stone raised. Harlan fired wild. The bullet sparked off rock near her shoulder stone chips, stinging her cheek. She drove forward, shoulder into his chest, the sacred stone cracking against his jaw. He reeled back, boots slipping on loose grit. The ledge gave. Harlan's arms, windmilled, eyes wide with a sudden understanding. He grabbed for her fingers, brushing her sleeve, then gravity took him. He fell backward, silent for the first instant, then a short, choked cry that cut off when his body struck the rocks below. A wet crunch. Then nothing. Clara Ara stood at the edge chest, heaving the sacred stone still clenched in her fist. It slipped from numb fingers, tumbling after him. It struck once, twice, then shattered on the canyon floor, pieces scattering like broken promises. The ground shuddered again, longer this time, a low groan rolling through stone and sand. Dust rose in a thin red veil. High on the far rim, Tarek crouched among boulders, small hands gripping rock eyes, fixed on the scene below. He saw the stone break, saw the woman stand alone on the ledge, blood on her cheek, no triumph in her face, only the quiet weight of something finished, and something begun that could not be undone. The wind carried the dust higher, staining the sky. The canyon held its new silence, deeper, colder, final. Clara Ara looked down at the broken pieces far below. Then she turned slow toward the rim where Taza waited. The imbalance spread outward, silent, patient, unstoppable. And the land kept its own ledger. The canyon floor lay quiet now, broken only by the slow drip of blood from high ledges and the heavy breathing of wounded horses. Harlan's body rested twisted among jagged rock 20 feet below neck, bent at a wrong angle, eyes open to the sky that no longer answered. Clara Ara stood on the narrow shelf above right hand, wrapped around a deep cut where the sacred stone's edge had bitten her palm when it slipped. Blood dripped steady between her fingers, dark against the red rock. She did not bind it. The pain kept her present. Hoofbeats rolled in from the south, many steady, not hurried. Mangas appeared first at the canyon mouth paint, streaked across his cheeks in simple lines of white and black. Behind him came Chiricahua riders, 10, maybe 12 bows ready, faces set hard. They fanned out without command, arrows knocked eyes sweeping the dead and the dying. Rafe Boone tried to rise from where he had fallen. A shaft took him through the throat before he could speak. Buck Slade roared once swung his heavy rifle. 2 arrows struck his chest in quick succession. He dropped like felled timber. Diego Reyes backed against the wall, hands raised. Mangas lifted a hand. The riders held. Diego's eyes flicked to Clara Ara above, and then to the broken stone scattered at Harlan's feet. He lowered his hands, slow. A single arrow ended it clean. The canyon filled with the smell of copper and horse sweat and dust kicked up by hooves. No one cheered. No one spoke. The riders moved among the fallen, checking for life, with the calm of men who had done this before, and would do it again if the land required. Mangas dismounted last. He walked to the base of the ledge, looked up at Clara. His face carried no triumph, only the weight of necessity done. Clara Ara met his gaze. She felt the release in her chest, sharp and hollow, like a breath held too long, finally let go. But beneath it lay something heavier. The cut on her palm throbbed in time, with her heart refusing to clot quick, as though the stone itself marked her. She looked down at Harlan's broken form. No satisfaction rose. Only the dull knowledge that the killing was finished, and the cost was only beginning. Mangas knelt beside the shattered petroglyph pieces. He gathered one fragment small, etched with the old spirals, turned it in his fingers. His jaw tightened. He placed it back among the rest, without ceremony. When he stood again, the ground felt different, drier somehow. Far off, near the hidden valley, the seep would be running thinner still. Deer would avoid the grass, already yellowing. The imbalance had taken root. Clara Ara's knees buckled once. She caught herself on the rock wall. The cut wept fresh. She knew it would scar deep, crooked a line across her palm no medicine could erase. She was no longer the outsider who had come begging shelter. But she was not fully of them either. The land had claimed a piece of her and given nothing back. Mangas looked up again. "You killed the black-hearted one," he said, voice low enough to carry only to her. But the earth demands its due. The stone is broken. The water sickens. The hunt will be lean until balance returns, if it returns. He paused. The wind moved once through the canyon, carrying fine red dust that stung her eyes. "Come down," he said. Not an invitation. A command born of duty. Clara Ara hesitated. She could stay here, let the sun and thirst finish what Harlan started, spare the camp further stain. Or she could descend, face whatever judgment waited in the valley, risk exile for the sin she had already committed. She started down the narrow path, boots scraping stone blood, leaving small dark drops behind her. At the bottom, Mungus waited. He did not offer a hand. She reached the floor legs, unsteady, but holding. From the shadows near a fallen boulder, Tarak stepped out, small, silent eyes fixed on her face. He looked at the cut on her palm, at the broken stone, at Harlan's body. He said nothing, only watched. The boy's gaze carried the weight of everything, seen everything, remembered. Mungus turned his horse. "Ride with us," he said. "The ceremony will speak. The land will answer." Clara Ara mounted behind Taza without a word. The riders moved out slow, leaving the dead where they lay. The canyon held its silence behind them, deeper now, heavier, waiting for what came next. And the imbalance followed quiet, as their hoofprints in the dust. The sun bled low across the canyon rim, turning the sky the color of old blood and casting long shadows over the wiki-ups. The central fire burned steady, but low flames licking at dry juniper branches that snapped and hissed without warmth. Clara Ara stood at the edge of the circle in the dress they had given her, soft buckskin, dyed with ochre and black quills sewn in simple patterns along the hem. It fit close, heavier than anything she had worn before, the weight of it pressing against her ribs like a reminder she could not remove. Yana waited in the center, ancient and thin as winter grass, white hair braided with eagle down. She held a single white eagle feather in her gnarled fingers, the quill wrapped in red thread. Around her, the people formed a loose ring, women with children at their hips, men standing silent, Mungus at the north point, Lozen to his right. Tarak stood outside the circle, small shoulders, straight eyes fixed on Clara Ara without blinking. He had not spoken since the canyon. No one had asked him to. Clara Ara stepped forward when Yana lifted a hand. The ground beneath her feet felt the same as always, hard-packed earth, but she knew better now. The imbalance lingered like a low hum in her bones. She stopped before the fire. Smoke rose thin and acrid, stinging her eyes. She did not flinch. Yana began the song, old words, in a voice cracked and thin, rising and falling like wind through dry reeds. The people joined low, a murmur more felt than heard. Clara Ara stood still, hands at her sides, palms turned up. The cut from the sacred stone had closed to a dark line across her right hand, raised and angry, refusing to fade. She felt it pulse with each heartbeat. The song faltered once, only a breath, but enough. Yana's voice caught, then steadied. The fire flickered sideways, as though pulled by an unseen draft. A faint rattle sounded from the shadows beyond the circle, dry scales on stone, quick and gone. Taboo. No one turned, no one spoke of it. Mungus watched from his place. His face remained stone, but his eyes rested on the broken fragment of petroglyph that had been carried back from the canyon, placed now at the fire's edge, like a wound left open to heal or fester. Chato stood near him, arms folded. When Clara Ara's gaze passed over him, he met it for half a heartbeat, then looked away, not in anger, but in the careful distance of a man who had accepted what must be accepted and nothing more. Yana stepped closer. She raised the eagle feather, white against the deepening dusk. "You have walked the hard path," she said, voice soft, but carrying to every ear. You have spilled blood to end blood. The land has taken its mark. She paused, feather trembling slightly in the unsteady air. From this moment, you are Goyon, wise one who stands with eagles. She reached up slow and tucked the feather into Clara Ara's hair above the left temple. The quill brushed her skin, cool, light, final. Clara Ara felt the name settle over her like the dress, heavy and irrevocable. Gratitude rose in her chest, quiet and real. But it carried no joy, only the knowledge that the old life was gone, the new one scarred from the beginning. She looked toward the broken stone at the fire's edge. Its pieces lay dark against the glowing coals. The fire popped once, sending a spark upward that died before it reached the sky. Yana stepped back. "But the earth will not forget," she said. No threat in the words, only truth. Clara Ara turned her head. Tarek still watched from outside the ring. Their eyes met. The boy gave one small nod, barely a movement, then looked down at his own hands. He had seen everything: the stone lifted, the fall, the breaking. He carried it now, silent as the land itself. The song ended. The people did not cheer. They simply stood a moment longer, then began to drift back to their fires and their shelters. Clara Ara remained where she was, the feather light against her hair, the scar on her palm throbbing in time with the dying light. The imbalance stayed with them, quiet, patient, woven into every breath of wind that moved through the valley. And the night came down, slow, heavy, with what had been done and what could not be undone. The first light of morning crept over the canyon rim, like a slow breath, pale and thin, turning the red rock to muted rose. Goyon stood alone at the edge of the drop, the new name still settling over her like a second skin. The buckskin dress hung familiar now, the white eagle feather in her hair brushing her temple with every shift of wind. Her right palm bore the scar, dark, raised, crooked, a line, etched by the sacred stone that would never smooth away. She knelt beside the broken fragments gathered from the canyon floor. The petroglyph pieces lay arranged in a rough circle on flat stone spirals, cracked lines severed where iron had bitten deep. Dust clung to the edges, red and fine. She touched one shard with her scarred hand, light, almost reverent, feeling the faint warmth that lingered, or perhaps only memory. Taza waited a few paces back, arms folded, face unreadable in the half-light. Mangas and Lozen stood farther off near the horses, silent as the rocks themselves. Tarak had followed without sound, small shadow at her shoulder, now close enough to feel his quiet breathing, but far enough to keep the distance the land still demanded. The wind stirred once, carrying fine red dust from the broken stone. It swirled low, brushing her knees, then died. In the stillness that followed, a dry rattle sounded, brief, deliberate, from the shadows under a nearby boulder. Scales on rock. The snake did not strike, did not flee. It simply watched, coiled in the half-dark black eyes, unblinking. Taboo made flesh. No one moved to drive it away. Goyon felt the imbalance in her chest like a breath caught halfway, never fully released. The seep near the valley still ran thin. The deer trails had shifted farther west. The people accepted her, now shared fire, spoke her new name. But the distance remained subtle, as the space between words not spoken. Chato would nod when she passed, but his eyes never lingered. Certain songs she would never join, certain objects she would never touch again. The land had taken its measure, and the mark stayed. She could stay live, as Goyon among them carry the scar and the name guard what remained of their ways, even as the imbalance shadowed every step. Or she could walk into the desert alone, leave the wiki-ups, leave Taza, spare them further stain. The choice hung there, heavy and unspoken, in the way her fingers lingered on the broken stone. She bowed her head, Her lips moved, once words too soft for the wind to carry, perhaps to Nasha, perhaps to the earth itself. A promise, a recognition, nothing more. Taza stepped forward. He placed a hand on her shoulder, light, steady, no pressure. She rose without hurry, the feathers shifting against her hair. Tarek came closer than small boots scuffing dust. He looked up at her face, then down at the fragments. His eyes held everything: the lifted stone, the fall, the breaking. He carried it now, wordless, the way the land carried its own wounds. No one spoke. Mangas turned his horse. Lozin followed. Taza waited until Goyon stepped beside him. They walked back toward the valley together, slow, deliberate, the group strung out in loose line against the rising light. Behind them, the wind fell completely still. No bird called. The snake uncoiled once, then vanished into shadow. Goyon walked with her back straight, scar throbbing faintly in her palm. The imbalance walked with her, too quiet, patient, woven into every footfall. The land had forgiven enough to let her live. But it would never forget. And neither would she. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone editing and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.